Joining me for this special interview today first is Tom Schmidt, who's well known on this radio station for the program The Weather Outside. Tom, thanks for coming on the air for this special occasion.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Dennis. And anytime we're talking to someone about the airport, I have an interest because living here for almost 30 years now, tend to see a lot and hear a lot and try to learn a lot. Looking forward to meeting Mike.
And you have suggested exactly where we're going, because the other person on this call right now is Mike Johnson. He is a pilot and a flight instructor. Mike, thanks for coming on the air with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dennis, and it's nice to meet you, Tom.
Mike, I asked you to come on the air today and ask Tom to join us because you have just written a book about the history of the Jamestown Airport. What is it that prompted you to do that?
Well, Dennis, I've always been really fascinated with local history. It's always something I've really liked, and for a while I've kind of been collecting photos of the airport from the early days, mainly because I wanted to see what it looked like. You know, because there have been a lot of changes there since it was first built in 31. So I really wanted to check that out, and I started collecting all these photos, and it got to a point where I realized, there's a decent story here that could be written. And I just had to figure out how to do it. I've never written a book before, so this was a big task for me. But I decided, what? No one else is going to write it. I'll do it. Since I have all the stuff, it made the most amount of sense. So, and of course, my aviation background also helped quite a bit with that as well.
Tom, next to you, if you would like.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed your book. I enjoyed the photos. It was fun to look at from 2 points of view. One, just to see how the airport has changed. I didn't know there were 3 runways at one point in time up there. And from another point of view, I was looking for my house in the pictures. I actually found it in one.
Oh, that's really cool. So yeah, the third runway is something really interesting. That's actually something I was really trying to find a photo of, and it was very difficult for a while. And the Fenn History Center was super helpful in eventually finding some for me. But it ran north-south, so it was a north-south runway, and it kind of lined up to where the Turner Road hangars are currently. And in the book, I have a map, and you can kind of see where it was. Actually, you can kind of see the outline. It almost lines up with the one taxiway going to the Turner Road hangars.
Okay. But the other 2 then are still in the same place they've always been.
Yep, the other 2 runways are in the same place that they've always been. And actually something really fascinating is normally runways are labeled for their magnetic direction. So, we have runway 25 at Jamestown that is heading 250 degrees. They drop off the zero. But what is interesting is back in the 40s, I have a photo, and it's in the book if you look really closely. The runways are labeled numerically. They're labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Which is something I never knew they did that.
So they're labeled in the way that they are labeled now for the convenience and understanding of the pilots when they come into them, Mike?
Right. So just the direction that you're going. So if you're on a runway that's 27, that'd be 270 degrees or direct or due west. Mm-hmm. But back in the day, they just labeled them, runway 1, runway 2, runway 3, runway 4. That's apparently how they did it back then, which I found really, really fascinating. Also, the one runway, 1331, which is the shorter one, that was also the taxiway that came straight off of it. You can kind of see it in the one photo. It went right up to the factory where they built the drones there during World War II. So that was kind of neat to see as well.
Well, that's another story, and maybe you could touch on that for a moment. And I don't want to have you give away the entire history of the airport there, but speak to the beginning of it for a moment, because as the interest in aviation was growing, it's not as though people easily got together and decided we should have an airport and where it should be and how it should be built. You've discovered that it was a little more, shall I say, tortured or controversial?
It was very controversial. The first airport was of course, Bergman Park there. There's a nice sign that shows that. And that was started by a man named Homer Schmidt. He owned the land, and it was on the former Henry Baker estate where Baker Street gets its name. And Homer Smith leased the land to Nick Almgren, Randy, and Wilder Winslow. They kind of ran the field there for about 5 years, but Homer Smith eventually wanted rent for it, and they didn't want to pay any rent, so that fell through pretty quickly. Then there was also a field in Falconer, where the elementary school is now, and that was run by a man named Einar Johnson, and that was there for a little while, too, into the 30s, 40s, and a little bit into the 50s until he moved to Warren. But there was a need for a big airport, so a couple of committee members decided to get together from Jamestown and try to pitch the idea of building an airport. And they looked around, and they actually wanted to develop the Baker Street site. But when the Department of Commerce came in, they said this is a terrible spot for an airport because it was close to a residential area. There was very little room for expansion. they went around, they explored about 16 different sites around the county, at least around the Jamestown area, for this airport, and they settled on the current site, the North Main Street site, as the best spot, just mainly because it provided so much room for expansion. Also, it being up on the hill, too. So then once they had found the spot, then just getting the city to pay for it was a bit of a battle. It was originally defeated in a vote. They wanted to spend $150,000 to develop it, and it was soundly defeated. There was a campaign going around that it was just going to be a playground for the rich people and their planes. And, you have to remember at this time, the majority of people didn't even own a car. So the thought of why are we spending $150,000 on an airport was definitely in their minds. So that's something to think about there, too, with their thoughts. But a group of individuals, including many prominent people that we know, like Robert H. Jackson, John H. Wright, Dr. Blaisdell, Fred Galloway, a lot of these names, big names in local history, they raised the money and bought the land and started to develop it themselves, and then eventually decided to donate it to the city, which the city, again, didn't want it. But eventually during the Depression, when there was money for airports, the city eventually decided to take it very reluctantly. And even some of the council members said when they voted to accept the airport as a gift, they said, we're not voting for an airport, we're voting for the jobs program. And I even found some little ads in the Post-Journal back when they were advertising people to come and work to build the airport. And if you would come, they'd obviously pay you, and you also got to keep the wood that you chopped down.
Oh, that's funny.
That's kind of the beginnings of the airport. Then obviously it built up from there. But as for why the airport is there, that's kind of the main story about that. But
now, I noticed that the airport you talk often about an FBO. Mm-hmm. What is an FBO, and what is the purpose of it?
So an FBO stands for Fixed Base Operator, and basically it is the office where you go to get fuel or flight instruction. So every airport has some sort of an FBO. Some airports, it's literally just a shed. Other airports, it's a whole giant office building with multiple floors. So, but every airport has what's called an FBO. Some people would refer to it maybe as a private terminal. That would probably be maybe an easy way for people to understand it.
Ah, okay. So do we currently have one at our airport?
Yes. So back in February, Lou Nelbone, who operated Jamestown Aviation Company, he got out of the FBO business. He was running both of them at Jamestown and Dunkirk. And Centric Aviation, which owns a handful of FBOs around the country, they took over operations at Jamestown and at Dunkirk. But in some places around the country, sometimes the county will operate the FBO, or other times will have a private company do it. And there are some big chains like Signature that also operate FBO, so there's a bit of a business there.
Okay.
Mike, tell us a little bit of the story of World War II and what the airplane was or the drone was that was so secretly constructed at Jamestown.
Yeah, so this is something that is probably more well-known than a lot of the stuff in my book, but it's still something that it's really amazing that they were able to build a drone during World War II. I mean, they actually had a remote-control drone with a camera in the front of it, but it was called the TDR-1, and basically it was, just as I mentioned there, the plane would take off, the landing gear would fall off because it doesn't need a landing gear anymore, so it's not landing, and then it would go and they would dive bomb it into a Japanese ship in the Pacific. That was the plan, and some did work, and they were using the Solomon Islands there a little bit. But the plane was decided to be built in Jamestown because we had such skilled furniture workers. That was kind of the reason that American Aviation Corporation, which was the company that built these planes, decided to build here. So they used a lot of local labor. But here's the thing, though. The people that were building the plane, they didn't know it was going to be a drone. They were building a plane that was completely kept secret. There were two halves of the building. One half that knew about the drone, the other half that just thought they were building an airplane, which is really cool. So they really tried to keep a tight lid on it. And they also did have a cockpit in there so someone could fly them to the mission site, and then they would be converted into the drone once they got to the mission site. But the longtime FBO operator there, Warren Skelton, he was the test pilot. He pretty much flew all of them after they came out of the factory. And actually, they even tested one. They put rockets on each side to try to be able to make it take off faster. And one side didn't fire, so it ended up crashing on one side of the airport there, which is kind of an interesting story. But there's quite a story there with those drones, and I actually wish we knew more. There's a lot of information about those that is still missing.
Now, Mike, is that building still there, the one that was split in half? Some people knew it was a drone and some wasn't. Is that facility still in existence?
Yep, it's Jamestown Advanced Products. And even the taxiway still goes up to it there. After it was the drone factory, then it became kind of a general aviation hangar that the city owned it briefly. But it's all still there. I would love to get a tour of that sometime. I wonder if there's anything left in the basement.
Something you might take home and put together, huh?
Yeah, well, part of the fun of making this book was talking to a lot of people. And I talked to a fellow by the name of Jeff Hall, whose parents started Chautauqua Airlines. And his dad actually found a propeller from one of those planes in one of those old buildings back when he was going through it in the 70s, and he still has it.
Tom, anything further that you would like to ask Mike?
Well, I have a few things. First of all, Mike, there's a tunnel now on West Oak Hill Road, and there's a common misconception that the runway was extended. It never was. Is that correct?
Right.
Isn't it?
That's correct. It never was.
What was the reason for the tunnel to be built over West Oak Hill Road, and then for them moving Turner Road at the other end of that main runway down the hill a ways?
Well, the tunnel was built basically for an expansion for a runoff area. Basically, in case a plane were to slide off, there are certain regs that have to be met and stuff like that to get a plane of a certain size in there. And I would assume it probably was because of Cummins, because they usually fly the biggest plane that comes in here. So I'm guessing Cummins probably had something to do with that. As for Turner Road, Turner Road was moved down the hill. I don't know too much about that. I know they built that road with old tires or something, but I don't know too much about the rerouting of Turner. The only thing I've really heard about Turner was that it was a popular drag racing spot for kids back in the day. But
still is for some, I think.
This is full of curving now, but yeah.
Oh, Tom, if you have other questions, feel free to go ahead.
Sure. Is it Luscombe? Is that how you pronounce the aircraft manufacturer that's coming in?
Luscombe.
Luscombe. Now, they've moved into the terminal on Turner Road where a lot of planes were stored. Is that all different now?
Yeah, so the building that they moved into, that's the Turner Road hangar. Actually, that's one of the newest buildings that's been constructed on the airport property. That was a general aviation hangar, so private individuals kept their planes in there. It was actually almost full when Luscombe came in, and the county gave it to them. I'm not sure exactly how that worked or what the deal structure was, but yes, they took over. We always call it the Turner Road hangar, but it's right off of Turner Road there. So they took over that, and that's right next to the other building there. That was the American Voting Machine hangar there, which is now just I believe a county storage thing because the door doesn't work on it anymore. But yeah, they came in there. They moved from California, but yeah, Luscombe is a very old airplane manufacturer, and people bought the rights to the name, and they're going to start building new airplanes there. So that's awesome for Jamestown.
So that hasn't happened yet. They're just still getting it ready and putting it together?
I think they're building some parts in there. Gavin Swanson actually just flew the first Luscombe plane back into Jamestown. He literally just got back like a day or two ago. So they actually have a plane there now. So they're starting production on parts, and then the plan is to build a plane. So
interesting.
In that same general neighborhood of the airport was the old terminal, and I'm Mike Johnson, old enough to remember the old terminal quite fondly, going up there when I was a kid and waiting for a plane to land and all the excitement. And it had a certain feel to it of early aviation with the hangar attached right to the terminal, and then the refreshment stand or whatever right upstairs there, the little cafe that went along with it. So talk to us a little bit about what you learned about that initial old terminal up there at the Jamestown Airport.
Yeah, so that building, again, that was probably one of the driving factors of me trying to look into this stuff. I wanted to see what that old building looked like. I knew everyone had talked about it, and when you're on Taxiway Delta going down to runway 25, you can still see where the ramp was, where the planes would be parked. It's still kind of there. And you can kind of make out where the building used to be. There isn't much left. But that building was built in the 30s. It was either built in 31 or 32. I actually have a pretty old photo of some cars being gassed up outside of it, which is pretty cool. But yeah, that building was there, and actually, I never got a chance to go inside of it, and I believe it was torn down in '92 or '93. The funny thing is, I can't exactly find out the exact date that building was torn down. For some reason, that is, I've been able to figure out an exact date on it. I have a pretty good idea. I know a general range, but as for the actual demolition, I'm not too sure on. But that building was there was a restaurant upstairs, and at one point they even had two hangars. They had one on the side and one on each side, basically, of it. to get different planes in there. And actually, it coexisted with the current terminal building, and it operated as the FBO for a while until the current FBO was built up by the terminal off Airport Road there.
So we've talked a lot about what was here and how the airport has evolved and changed since way back in the 30s. Mm-hmm. Where do you see this airport going? What's happening now? What's the future?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic about it. You know, I always tell people this, too. We are so fortunate to have this nice of an airport in Jamestown. I've flown all around the country. I've been to all kinds of different airports. For the size of Jamestown, most places don't have an airport this nice. So we are very fortunate. We have an instrument landing system here. We have, obviously, the aircraft manufacturer. There's a ton of industry going on, and a ton of people do use it in the summer. A lot of the Chautauquans flying and stuff like that on their jets and stuff. So it does used a lot, and I see the future of it as very good, so especially with Luscombe coming in and with what the company I work for, Majestic Aviation, is doing up there. I see a lot of growth.
Well, good. Thank you. We look forward to seeing where it goes.
Mike, as we conclude here, and we don't want to take all day nor give away the entire book, but as you suggested, you have flown all around the country. How long have you been a pilot?
I've been flying, probably my first flight lesson, well, I've been riding the backseat of an airplane since I was a little kid. So but my first flying lesson was probably in 2009, and I got my license my senior year of high school in 2011. And then, of course, I've gotten more ratings since then. So quite a while.
Then what kind of an airport? Because we look at the runways, Tom in particular sees them every day, every time he drives in and out of his house. But from the perspective of a pilot, is Jamestown a good airport to fly in and out of, or is it one that, you kind of grit your teeth and say, oh, I've got to get in and out of Jamestown? Is it a hard airport to fly in? Tell us what it's like from the perspective of a pilot.
It's very good, but the airport is great, but the weather's the tricky part. As with everything, with the weather around here makes things difficult. But minus the weather, the runways are situated in really good angles to the wind. They have amazing length. I mean, we got 5,000 feet, over 5,000 feet on the main runway. We got 4,000 feet on the shorter runway, so it's plenty for all kinds of big jets even. So it really is a treat to fly in, and we have the instrument landing system, which allows us to get down to really about 200 feet above the ground, which is huge. A lot of places don't have an airport like that. Like you go to an airport like Corey, it's a lot smaller. And that's a little tighter and it's a little harder to get into. The runway's a little narrower. So no, Jamestown is an amazing airport. Only thing that holds us back is that pesky ice.
I was just about to ask you, when you said weather, exactly what it was that you were concerned about. And it's fundamentally the winter weather. And, of course, we had a tragic accident not that long ago there that was related to winter weather. That's the biggest challenge. The rest of the time of year, the wind, the rain, anything else, sun, anything else that happens up there does not present a challenge to a trained pilot such as yourself. No. The airport has been set up very nicely. There was a lot of forethought when they built the runway the way that they did. It's amazing how they knew back then. They planned for expansion. It's almost like they knew what was coming, and they set it up very nicely for us. But yeah, the winter weather stuff is by far the one limiting factor. And Mike, the one thing that we haven't said is the exact title of your book and where people can find it and what it costs. And we ought to do that before we let you go.
Yeah, so it's called The History of the Jamestown Airport. It is available at the Fenton History Center. It's also available at Centric Aviation, the FBO, up off Airport Drive there. So those are the two places you can come and get it. Also, I'll just make a plea out there to anyone. If you do happen to have any photos from the interior of the old terminal building, send them my way. My email is flyschautauqua@gmail.com. That's the one thing that I've yet to find, some interior photos of the old terminal building. And something I found pretty cool, there were 3 gates for airplanes. When Mohawk and Allegheny were there, we actually had 3 gates at Jamestown.
Wow, that's a lot of gates.
Well, because I've always been used to Jamestown. So there's just one plane. You walk outside, you get on, and you go. I had no idea that. Wow, I mean, it was at one time they had multiple departures going different places, and it was really bustling at one point as a commercial airport. Well,
and we could say more about Allegheny and Mohawk for those who do not remember them or remember much about them, but I'll just let them get the book. How much does it cost, Mike?
It's $20, and of course at the Fenton or at Centric Aviation.
And Mike, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today. And Tom, it's always great to be on the air with you, whether it's the weather outside or any other special event that comes along.
My pleasure, Dennis, and it's a pleasure meeting you, Mike. I look forward to seeing you drive by or fly over.
Sounds good. I'll rock my wings for you. And thank you so much for having me, Dennis.
You're very welcome.